Welcome back, Venturers. It's time for another discussion about VNs. I am MR, and together with Tauros, we decided to dedicate this episode to all the losers. From the annoying, through the loathsome, to the unfortunate. All kinds of loser characters. And that is not even mentioning losers who decide to host a VN podcast. Ha! So Tauros, tell us more about yourself.
Well, why don't you start things off, because you're the bigger loser here. Look at the thumbnail. You're in last place. You can't even win with losers.
I mean, but I tried. Don't you see it?
Yes,
I tried.
You
and
tried.
I got the biggest trophy.
And you know what? Trying is what counts. Anyways, though, but as far as this, we wanted to discuss the loser characters in visual novels and the various ways that these kinds of characters can be portrayed. I feel like right off the bat, MR kind of tied into some of this, but there's two different kinds of loser characters. There's the first type, which is more about a hate sink for the reader to just be disgusted and annoyed with. The kind of character with a lot of negative qualities that the story is clearly building for you and the other characters to hate. But then there's the other type of loser character where it's someone who is just trying their hardest, or maybe not, but just can't ever get any success. The kind of character who just keeps failing or keeps coming up short. And I think these are two very different types of loser characters, right, MR?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I want to start discussing the first one. So like a reprehensible role in the story, but also a loser. I have a hard time characterizing such a character if they are capable. I can't really bring myself to call them a loser. So in order for them to be reprehensible losers, they also have to be in some way incompetent or maybe cowardly, maybe hide behind some other obstacles for the protagonist. They aren't reliable or capable. That's how I portray those kind of losers.
Mm-hmm. And I think the one example that everyone thinks of right off the bat is Shinji from Fate Stay Night. He's practically the poster boy for the most hated visual novel characters across all sorts of titles, because of the reasons you mentioned. Like, he is arrogant, and he's whiny, and he constantly brags about himself, even though he never really accomplishes anything. In fact, several times in Fate Stay Nights, he's trying to accomplish things and he comes up short, and other characters even berate him for being so freaking useless.
Yes, and the way he chooses the methods are all reprehensible and repulsive, and despite all that, he doesn't bring results, and that makes him the biggest loser.
Yes, and I think that's a great point, though, is that he doesn't get results, in that when you have a character who does get results, that tends to come across more of cool to the reader. It's like you have all sorts of main characters who follow the very rugged individualism, like an American kind of character. Like, a good example is Meteor World Actor, where you have our main detective who is incompetent in many ways, but on top of that, he breaks the rules, he doesn't listen to his superiors, he does things his way even if he has to get bailed out by his teammates and stuff. But, end of the day, he does get results. He does catch the bad guys and make discoveries and breakthroughs, and I think that's the biggest difference, just like you're claiming. How when you have a loser character who is incompetent, like, they're very clearly meant to be hated. Whereas if you have a character who does things their own ways and comes across a lot of failures and is very abrasive but still gets the job done, I think that's seen more of a cool character.
Yes, and you won't believe what an example I brought. Exactly that. Of a character that in a lot of ways is reprehensible or has a compass you can't quite agree on, or maybe the method he chooses are just wrong for many reasons, but for some reason or another pulls through, and it runs.
Mm-hmm.
He is so close to being a loser, a baby that throws tantrums so often, but for one miraculous reason or another, he pulls through when it matters. It helps that his companion, a mage that accompanies him everywhere, she is ultra capable, despite how he claims she's useless. She's insanely capable of turning situation on its head just by using magic. Whereas he, a random fighter who is on average, maybe a bit above average fighter, but nothing special, honestly. He just has enough charisma, luck, and is surrounded by capable people, and has a lot of luck, honestly, in the story, that he pulls through. But he is so close, so very close to be a loser. But I wouldn't say so.
Exactly. It wouldn't be hard to imagine a character very similar to Rance, but who shows up in the story as like some enemy of, this some enemy of a certain story arc. And you could believably buy, a lot of those same characteristics. Someone who depends entirely on his flunkies to accomplish anything. Someone who brags a ton about themselves but doesn't have any capabilities themselves. Someone who has like a superpowered sidekick who reluctantly does everything. You could imagine that as a villain, right?
Exactly. Or for one reason or another got into position of power, so delegate responsibilities but doesn't do anything by itself. And there's plenty of characters across the Rance universe that are just complete fools, but just so happens to be generals. Okay, so they'll command armies to their doom. But ultimately they won't get consequences. The common folk will. That makes them reprehensible. And at the same time, incompetent.
Now, I did want to ask you on this front what you think about Mr. Main Character of School Days, Makoto. How incompetent can you say he is when you have a whole bunch of, multiple choice decisions to make that the reader can influence how he plays out?
Man, this is such an interesting case, because I feel like despite how this game allows the most drastic and dramatic situation to be put himself in, Makoto, I feel like he's the most reprehensible when you pick nothing. Because that indecisiveness is such... it's weaponized to such a degree. It's one of his worst traits. And he becomes a total loser in every sense of that word. Going back to your original question, how I could place that kind of character, I feel like the way they portray him, he starts very close to be a typical loser. It's up to the player who manages the choices to steer him away from that trajectory. But he's definitely on course for the loserville, okay? If you don't try to fix his apathy, that's the disaster going to happen.
Although I don't know how much of it is on the reader to fix his apathy, because I'm not sure if that's what School Days intends. I don't know if School Days is that kind of story where it's encouraging you to find a way to get a happy ending for everyone involved. I feel like School Days is more of watching the drama unfold. All the messy interpersonal relationships involved and the bad decisions all the characters make. And in that sense, it's like you said, that yes, you can make better options than not when you are making decisions for our main character, but does that really change if what the visual novel, what the story is intending for him to be a loser?
Like I said, he has all the predisposition to be a loser. He's way on its way to be a loathsome individual because of either the choices he makes or lack thereof in the commitment department. Let's go back and let's talk about the intent. And let's say that, because I think the game has around 16 endings, more or less, but let's assume it's 16. And let's say the nice, peaceful ending you could redeem him are 2 out of 16. I still feel like there's a lot of catharsis into reverting the course for a loser character to not be so loathsome. Now, whether or not that's intent is hard for me to say, given that a lot of VN readers, I don't know if majority or not, but a lot of them are, let's call them one routers, so they watch one ending. If they try to avert tragedy, did they play wrong? I wouldn't call it that. Regardless of how the game portrays, as long as there is a redemption path and you pursue it, you can redeem someone who is as much of a loser and has those tendencies as Makoto Ito from School Days.
Okay, that's interesting. On the note of redemptions, I guess that ties into the other kind of loser character that we mentioned earlier, is that, as you mentioned, it's the kind of character who is always earnestly trying, but just keeps failing. Like a loser character in the more literal sense of the word, is that right?
Yeah, that's more of a... Well, the first, because we established some sort of role in the story. For the first to be reprehensible, and maybe they have the redemption, maybe not. Depends on how many choices you get. With main character as Makoto, you have more. With side characters, probably have less, or antagonist characters, none, probably. Now you're establishing a different kind of loser. A loser that is portrayed to either begin as a need, for example, or hikimori of sorts, or maybe someone who is hardworking, but yet despite all that constantly fails and is defined by that loserness. And its story arc and character development is all about changing and coming out as a better person. And unlike those first class of characters that are made more or less to be hated or loathed, those second class is the ones we want to cheer for. Like, yeah, you go, girl. Stop being depressed, please. Have a teddy bear. Like something like that.
Exactly, and I think that ties into the whole aspect of moe entirely, because inherently moe is a heroine who you just want to protect, and to a lesser degree someone you want to see succeed, someone you want to help, someone you want to see her live out her dreams. And in a sense, exactly, that ties into them being a loser character in the first place, because if they were already accomplishing their dreams, there would be no drama, there'd be no character growth to begin with. There has to be something going wrong in a character's life for us to have a story and for us to have that growth you're talking about. And I think that goes hand in hand with moe. So does that make just a lot of characters in general just a little bit of loserness in them?
That's a very hard to say, because I'm not sure if I completely agree with Moa. As in, because I assume you allude to some sort of Moa gap, as in the character is portrayed as a loser but has the possibility, or is cute anime girl, so she surely can do better than being in the pit of despair. I'm not sure about that, because in the cases of redeemable losers, let's say, the characters that are either protagonists or maybe side characters, recruitables in your party, or maybe romanceables. It all revolves about some sort of critical flaw exemplified that you work either around or work towards repairing or overcoming. And it can be as simple as building some sort of self-esteem, because that's a lot of characters defined by lack of self-esteem. I would say a lot. Again, this is something that doesn't quite fit the loser from the second description, but has a lot of loser-like traits, would be Raider from Fate. She has absolutely no self-esteem. She has absolutely crazy bad luck getting paired with the other loser from Fate and constantly failing because of that.
Although you could argue the deck is stacked against them.
Oh, definitely.
Exactly, and thus can you say how much of it is their fault, or is it, I don't want to say it's an excuse, but it's an explanation, and that really softens the blow for a reader
True.
thinking that, they're not a loser, it's just they're up against incredible odds.
Yes, but they may be victims of circumstances or an environment, but that defines a lot of hikimori neat losers.
Yes.
And again, like I said, it's a very funny example that Ryder has a lot of those characteristics shared. Again, really funny, but I can't quite picture myself saying that Ryder is a loser character. But she's somewhere in the vicinity, is orbiting near the planet loser.
Yes, she has very few highlights in the story. Now,
but that's fine, because I dislike that character, so it's fine.
Oh, okay. Well, you didn't have to throw that in there at the end. That's just rude. Because, yeah, that's an inherent part of a whole lot of action titles, a whole lot of tournament, visual novel story arcs. Basically, any form of power scaling is that some people are going to be on top, and that necessitates some people to be under them. And so when you have a white cast, some people are just kind of the designated, losers in a sense. And they're regularly getting those L's in fights, and their power levels is below the others. But again, I don't think that inherently makes them a loser character. I think, the crux of this, no matter what kind of loser we're talking about, is how the story portrays them. If the visual novel, gleefully kicks them constantly versus shows this character with happy friends and supporting them and plenty of normal slice of life scenes when they're plenty happy. Like, again, going back to Shinji, almost every time we see Shinji, he's either getting told off by one of the other heroines, or he's clearly kind of being a sleazeball. There's several times he's, supposedly Emiya's friend, and yet he just keeps dumping work on him in the introduction. Heck, the introductory scene, the very first time we see Shinji, he's hitting on Rin, and she pretty harshly rejects him, and he gets all bitter about it and runs away. It's like, it's clearly all throughout the story of Fate Stay Night, it really just treats him like dirt. And, he earns it, and so the reader just goes along with that belief the whole time. But, there's several titles from the stuff that you've read, MR, where the story treats these loser characters a lot more graciously. Like, they sometimes get their own highlights, or they're just happy slice of life scenes, right? And there's plenty of those that you see, and you can sympathize with them at least, right?
Absolutely. I want to go back even to our favorite loser to talk about today, Shinji example, because there's something important there that is reprehensible that we brought up in the kind of losers we cheer on for, right? They often are, or maybe by proxy or maybe directly, a victim of some sort of circumstance, environment, or something outside of their power, right? Well, Shinji at least from the perspective of friends, isn't really suffering. It's actually he who pushes away a lot of people rather than being bullied. And that makes him, on one of the axes that we can talk about, very reprehensible. Multiple times the protagonist tries to approach him at least neutrally, if not warm, but gets really bad reception from Shinji. And that shows that he is even more of a loser and deserves that title. Because if he doesn't bring results and he gets shafted by the story, you feel some sort of catharsis, like, haha, you deserve that, you bitch. Like, yeah.
Okay, because yeah, I think a big aspect of this again is how much the visual novel itself treats these kinds of characters, whether or not it shows them any sympathy or gives them a bone, or like I said with Shinji, it just treats him like dirt the whole time.
True.
On another note, this was another interesting point I thought of, is that I think there is a difference between loser characters and the comedic side characters. Because in visual novels, we tend to get plenty of those. We've got our Mr. Main character, and then there's his goofball best friend that he's known for forever. The kind who's usually a jokester, or has his own dreams and then keeps coming up short in very funny ways. It's always intended for the lighthearted comedy bits. I don't think these kinds of guys are loser characters. Even though by definition, they regularly fail at stuff. And they're kind of supposed to be, played for laughs. That's the difference, is that I don't think it's meant to be us kicking them when they're down. It's supposed to be laughing along with them to lighten the mood.
True. I think when it comes to comic reliefs, it's completely different than losers, although this is not mutually exclusive. And if we go for a moment to school days, I'd say the best friend character of Makoto is also a loser, if not bigger than Makoto himself, which is scary to think about. Because in a lot of ways, he is even more reprehensible than Makoto. And in a lot of cases, he, how can I say, nudges Makoto in the wrong direction.
That's a bad influence on our main character.
Yeah, exactly, as a bad influence. And it's like, wow. After some time, if you think about it, they kind of deserve each other. You reach that kind of conclusion. And only if you have a distance from that best character, you can redeem Makoto in some endings.
Unfortunately,
but
Makoto doesn't always get that redemption, does he?
That's true. Oh my god, it's very rare, and maybe it's good that it's rare because it wouldn't work otherwise. He has to be, for the most part, a loser for that redemption to hit as hard as it does. And that's a very unique feeling when you see a person that fumbles around and fucks up a lot of situations to really pull through. That's I often say when it comes to School Days original. My favorite ending is not the two good endings, it's actually the anti-bad ending. It's probably my favorite.
Anti-bad ending?
Yeah, there's a lot of path that steer you to the dead ending you are not seeing the next day kind of deal. And there are opportunities Makoto can take to revert the situation and really pull through when it's needed. And it's really, really something.
Like a disaster
justice
averted.
Is served. Yeah, exactly. Disaster control, disaster recovery. Choice. Like, damn. And it's like crisis averted in the last moment and he pulls through. Doesn't really, how can I say, doesn't really negate all the passiveness and apathy he shown up until this point, but at the very least, he redeems himself in that moment, saying, okay, he's seen the light, so to speak, and rights the wrongs.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's nice. On a different note, who is your favorite loser character, MR?
Natsumi from Data Life.
Ah,
I don't think there is. I don't think there is a better example of a loser that is defined by lack of self-esteem than Natsumi, because that's a central core of her being, and it takes many, many, many different character arcs for her to begin to overcome that. And it's such a deep-seated trauma that is very hard to overcome. Like, reading her progress is really heartwarming. And just to explain everything, Data Life is a series that became as books that later got an anime adaptation, and after that, VN spin-off series. In VN spin-off series, a lot of characters, specifically those that join the story later on, so think about in the middle of the story, got a little bit more exposure. And the segments from Natsumi were always probably the best when I read them, because that's the kind of character that kept to herself, always closed off. And in VNs, not only they could create more, I wouldn't call necessarily laid-back scenarios, but more slice of life-ish to explore, but also really show inner thoughts of that character. Again, books do that too, obviously. Anime less so, obviously. But in VNs, it's really, really wholesome how you see she slowly comes out of her shell, even though that's insanely difficult, and sometimes reading that you see how it's one step forward and two step backs kind of deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess you're subscribing to like the second kind of loser character, the one who's really just not finding any success, and you're in it because of the character growth involved, of seeing where the story takes this one character and how invested you get. Yeah, that's very nice.
Yeah, and honestly, this is one of those characters that is very hard for me to recommend reading if you've ever suffered from self-esteem or depression, because the way it's portrayed in the book is, it's hard to read sometimes. A character that has a track record of being badly treated to the point of shattering her own self-esteem has a very hard time rebuilding trust in people. This is why, on contrary, a similar character that is lacking self-esteem is the Rider from Fate Stay Night. Mm-hmm. She always says, "Oh, I'm not beautiful, etc., etc." And I'm there cringing, reading that. Not only never, ever anybody treated her badly, but she's literally a servant based upon the goddess of fertility. And I faced on so hard.
Okay.
Now, granted, that doesn't discount the fact that some person deep inside themselves thinks about own self-worth in a different dimension that the environment sees them as. Fine, I can accept that. But there is such a huge contrast of how insanely beautiful she's portrayed, and she's like, "Oh, I'm ugly," and she's like talking constantly like that. I'm like, shut the fuck up, Jesus! I can't stand that.
I mean, it was mostly because she was pretty tall. That's why.
That was one of the components. That's true.
Yes. As for me, though, I gotta say, my favorite loser character that I've seen in a visual novel is Kenji from Katawa Shoujo.
Ooh.
He was the one guy who was legally blind with the really thick glasses. The one guy who was regularly going off about conspiracy theories involving the world going on all around him. Very often complained about feminists.
Uh-huh.
He was very polarizing between, there were a lot of people who just
Yeah.
hated him every time they saw him, and a lot of people who liked him. I was in the camp who just saw him as the comic relief. And he was treated like a loser character. He was very often just alone in his own world in the story, kind of cut off from most other characters, except for our main character. And the whole time, it's not like he ever did much. It was just, hey, he stumbled across our main character, and now he's gonna launch into his rants about, feminism and conspiracies and people controlling the world. And it's like, our main character was not really high on any of his speeches either.
Yeah,
I thought he was a nice change of pace between the regular goings of the school to just see a guy the visual novel is presenting as very out there, even if some of his speeches were kind of funny. Like I said, I thought it was nice comic relief.
I feel like he is a funny example of a comic relief character that is also a loser, or maybe even more precise, can become a loser if you dig deeper. Because if you don't really interact with him, he will just stay a wacko, no name, whatever guy. Kind of weird. But it's the moment you keep on pressing, keep on seeing what makes him tick, then you uncover he's a loser as well. In a very funny comedic way of how obsessed he is about conspiracy theories.
Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's a loser character is a big part of how the story itself decides to treat them. And I think Kenji fits that mold. And I also thought that he was a fun change of pace, and he was fun in small doses, and we got scenes with him, and then we moved on back to the main events.
Yeah, but that's true. Losers are often defined how story treats them, and funny enough, if you define, let's say, conflict, right? If you have a game that is less about combat and a conflict is more of a talking, interacting, then the losers would be defined by the fact that they are secluded or alone or isolated. And that's him, exactly, right? The more you know about him, the more he's delusional because his ideal is so ridiculous. But on the other hand, if you have a game that is the conflict is more combat-centric, those kind of loser slash comic relief can become, I think the best term to use is jobbers, that constantly lose in the fights, or in Rand's example, because I also prepared one character, literally all they are sleeping. So in Run 03, you get a character to your party that has absolutely useless skills. She always slacks all the time, and that's your reward for bitching about having new party members to the adventuring guild, because Rans likes having a tantrum like a baby, so that's the character he got. Congrats. I'm like, okay, that's humorous. That's a kind of a loser from the standpoint of gameplay and combat to some degree, reinforced by gameplay, and now sold you as a whole package of comic relief in how she doesn't contribute, and a loser from the standpoint of how she's treated. Like, okay, that's hilarious.
The fun ways gameplay can interact with visual novel stories.
True.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, but that's a good note to wrap it up on. So thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about some of the various loser characters in visual novels. There's many ways a story can handle these, and it's always funny seeing the different types that show up in a story, and also how the twists and turns in a story decide what to do with them.
Yeah. I also want to thank all our listeners. Tell us in the comments what is your favorite loser, and to all of you who braved and listened to this moment, you are all winners.
Yes.
VNture out.
Oh, VNture out.